Welcome to Insatiable, the podcast where we discuss the intersection of food, psychology, and culture. I'm your host, Ali Shapiro, an integrated health coach, 32-year and counting cancer survivor, and have radically healed my relationship with food and my body. And for the past 17 years, I've been working with clients individually, in group programs, and in company settings to do the same. Welcome. The information in this podcast should not be considered personal, individual, or medical advice. Hello, y'all. As a heads up, I'm working on something really exciting for all of you who want to stop falling off track with your food. This means for November, I'll be re-airing some of my best of episodes. Today's is one of those, as sugar is a hot topic with the Insatiable podcast community, especially those of you who are going alcohol-free or are sober, who we have a ton of listeners who find Insatiable that way. So 2 quick notes before the show. In this episode, I do discuss some of the politics of food and food marketing. It's pretty eye-opening. I grew up, my family always talked politics. We love to debate politics. And this has always been a big lens that I bring to my work. In fact, learning about the political landscape and how it influenced our food supply and health choices 20 years ago is part of the passion that motivated me to take the risk to leave my corporate job. However, recently there's been a lot of, shall we say, political interest in the wellness space. If you know, you know. If you don't, I wouldn't worry about it. Anyhow, I want to make it clear I have not come to the same conclusions many in the wellness space have about what the political solutions are. I'm happy to see people starting to take a look at the collective environment we all have to navigate for our health. Personal responsibility is important, and holding the and we need collective solutions. It should not be this hard to be healthy. Coming to understand the political landscape is really important. And again, I have not come to the same conclusions many in the wellness space. Many who are quite new to wellness and politics have. Second, if after today's episode you want to take action on resolving your cravings, sugar cravings specifically, I have my Freedom from Craving program for you, and I will put the link in the show notes. I found that about 50% of what my clients think is emotional eating of sugar specifically is actually blood sugar deregulation. So I created Freedom from Cravings. It's only $67 to help you resolve these cravings. And also, if you're thinking, I'm a salt person, I like pizza, fries, soft pretzels, that's just salty carbs, just so you know. Becca F., a client who took Freedom from Cravings, said Freedom from Cravings was a totally new way of looking at food. For one, it's not a prescription. Rather, it's an invitation to explore systematically the types and timing of food that works for your body. Personally, I realized that eating in a way that balanced my blood sugar not only reduced my cravings and binges, but it also significantly reduced my anxiety, improved my sleep, and stabilized my energy. Note here, this is really important if you're in perimenopause or menopause, okay? All those things are like foundational in menopause and perimenopause. So back to Becca. As someone who had done a fair amount of emotional work prior to entering the program, I was blown away by how much blood sugar and food was affecting my moods. No therapist or psychiatrist had ever told me that my diet could be playing such a huge role in the way I was feeling. Turns out that blood sugar balancing is the self-care I didn't know I needed. Okay, enjoy today's show. There's starting to be more in the news asking, is sugar an addiction? And of course, I've mentioned in this season that often we might not think it is so dangerous simply because it is legal, put into everything, and we are relentlessly marketed to use it. But I don't want you to let the government and mainstream media decide how you decide, especially when the FDA and EPA are revolving doors with executives from food and chemical companies and media companies don't use any sort of moral compass to vet advertising. I find there's a huge disconnect between people understanding on some level how our government is a corporate oligarchy and influences medical research, and yet, if we don't know enough about what works for our bodies and the systems we live in, I still see people default to doctors' outdated nutrition information when they get back blood work that shows high cholesterol or high blood pressure, for example. And I get it. When we feel vulnerable because of our health and then we get scary news, we look to an authority who ideally knows how to support us. The key here is to know which authority to pick. Part of the adult development work we do in Truths with Food is to learn how to move from the socialized mind to the self-authoring mind. The socialized mind is what we call the good girl in my work. The good girl bases her metrics and ideas of good and bad from what we've learned through diet culture, Western medicine, intuitive eating, body positivity, and also in our families, schools, and religions. The self-authoring or boss mindset is where we can be our own discerning authority about what to take from these places, what to add, what to leave, and metabolize all of this for what we want to choose for our bodies. In the case of sugar, my hope is it won't take the FDA coming out to say sugar is bad for you to understand its effects on your body, your kids' bodies, and our environment, and to take it seriously to reduce it in your life. I'll show you briefly today why that's not going to happen, so I don't want you to wait for it to happen. The main focus of today's episode is to give you easy food and emotional shifts to start to reduce sugar in your diet, because this episode is called Sugar Rehab. Before we get to the lay of the land and then how to get out of the matrix, I want to define what I mean by sugar here. First, I'm talking about what we traditionally think of as junk food, but also processed carbs or sugar added to healthy foods. So peanut M&Ms, which I personally like and sometimes eat. Yes, those are sugar. Gummy bears, yes. Gummy vitamins, yes. Processed carbs are whole grain carbohydrates like rice or whole wheat that have most of their fiber removed to increase shelf life. They are your pastas, most breads, including lots of gluten-free breads, pretzels, corn chips, French fries, which I also love at times, all processed mainly from having the nutrients, especially fiber, removed to increase shelf life. Packaged foods and their profits rest on long shelf life because the shorter the shelf life, the more chance of spoiling, the more chance of less profit. And healthy foods that have sugar added to them, I'm including here, like salad dressings, dried fruit. I've been shocked at how Whole Foods adds sugar to their dried cranberries. Ketchup, right? This is not necessarily a health food, but we don't realize how much sugar is in ketchup. I'm going to repeat this visual, but I'll give it to you now. 4 tablespoons of sugar is about 1 packet visually. And so ketchup, basically in 1 tablespoon of ketchup is like 1 sugar packet, right? So it's really like sugar tomatoes. Sauces are also laced with sugar. Also with carbs, because of diet culture, people often want to lump whole foods like white potatoes or sweet potatoes, or even corn or higher carbohydrate vegetables into the sugar category. I am not including those because they are real whole foods and have a place in our diet. I mean, even cool white potatoes are prebiotic foods, right? So I'm not including anything that's a whole real food. Obviously, the sugar products I'm talking about all have different amounts of sugar. But when you start realizing sugar is a major ingredient in almost every food, you have to realize processed carbs aren't only in bread and candy. And if you want to get really discouraged, the climate crisis is even making our vegetables have more carbohydrates in them. Mother Jones did this piece on how the climate crisis is killing our low carb diets. They shared how when the air that surrounds plants is richer in carbon dioxide, they use it to synthesize more carbohydrates, including starches and sugars, which are then stored in plant cells. Essentially, more carbon in the air means more carbs in plants. And these carbs then dilute the other beneficial molecules, including proteins and some vitamins and minerals, taken up and are synthesized by the plants. But despite all of this, we can have a healthy relationship with sweet and salty carbs, especially if we do the emotional work in how we relate to food. Part of having a healthy relationship with sugar is understanding the lay of the land of what you are up against. Part of why I bring social structures into my work is because once you see why something like dramatically reducing sugar in your diet is so hard because of our culture, you can have more self-compassion and a deep understanding that you aren't broken, weak, or somehow addicted to food, sugar especially. In fact, after seeing the landscape, you might be surprised that you aren't eating even more sugar. Seeing how much our culture sets you up for nutritional failure is part of the healing. And once we can see how we are influenced by these bigger forces, we can then see we have a choice and choose to work to get untangled from this insanity. Okay. For starters, even if you think you eat relatively healthy, now the big food companies own most of the natural food companies. Like Annie's is owned by General Mills. Honest Tea is owned by Coca-Cola.
Naked Juice is owned by Pepsi. And being acquired isn't inherently bad. However, you have to understand these companies are going to try and put their same business model onto these brands. The food business has very small margins. And from what I've seen with some of these brands, companies start taking shortcuts on quality to improve their profits. This isn't always the case, but it's something to be aware of. Most big food companies are like viruses. They know how to evolve and evade and get more sophisticated as consumers become more aware. And lots of these more natural and organic brands weren't that healthy to begin with. They can be great as a transition to more whole foods, but they're still packaged. So most food brands are all owned by a few big companies, and they have massive advertising budgets. And they need them to help us feel like we can trust these brands. I shared in my well-rounded newsletter an article The Atlantic did on how much companies spend advertising sugar to us. This is just a sample, but I want you to take in these numbers. In 2014, Kellogg spent $32 million in advertising for Pop-Tarts alone, only for Pop-Tarts. Can you imagine spending, I think of what could have been done with $32 million other than advertising Pop-Tarts. And the inner efficiency taskmaster in me is like dying a slow death when I know this much money was going to advertising sugar. Coca-Cola spent $269 million advertising its flagship product, Coca-Cola. $269 million. And Pepsi spent $150 million just to advertise the brightly colored sugar water that is Gatorade. And they do this because of sugar, which interferes with our physiological and psychological feedback loop, makes you hungrier, which turns out what was once inelastic demand, meaning in economic terms, you can't increase demand that much, or so they thought. But once they started adding sugar and many of its derivatives, like high fructose corn syrup, and other tricks like smells, etc., they could get people to eat more. The food industry went from 1% gross profit margin to 5% gross profit margin in the span of 3 decades. And you may not think that's that much, but that's a 500% increase, right? Like look at it that way, not just that it's a 5% gross margin. I told you they have really small profit margins, but they increased their profit margin 500%. That's staggering. These companies spend so much on branding because it works. Mainly they spend it so we will start to feel safe with these products, starting with serving it to children. Because when we have it as kids, it can serve as a tool of comfort and control when we don't have much other control in our lives. Kraft actually hired a psychologist to help them develop their Lunchables product, which is also laced with sugar. What the psychologist taught Kraft was that kids have very little control in their lives. So if they could create a product that gave kids control, that would be part of the appeal. And that was part of the design of Lunchables. Kids could choose what they wanted and what they could trade. It gives children choices when so much of their life they can't choose. And think of your own memories of sugar. And the foods you turn to now aren't only about the sweet flavor. It's about the emotional connection of comfort or reward. Soda is that way. Christmas cookies, pizza, right? I think about as a family, my parents were, city school teachers and they got paid every other week. And going out to eat was a big extravagance back then. And we would go to Pizza Hut every Friday. It was kind of like the fun day out. And our school participated in Book It, which was this program. You read like 5 books, you would get a mini free pan pizza, right? So the connection between processed carbs and reward starts very young. Even with my clients who grew up in highly dysfunctional families, food was often what they turned to, or going out to eat with their family was the time when their families weren't fighting. So even if home wasn't safe, food became a way to numb out or avoid the dysfunction. Food companies also fight for shelf space at children's eye level and have a term called the nag factor, which they hope kids will wear their parents down nagging them for the foods they've been advertised to with their favorite cartoon characters. I'm already dreading when the day comes of how I'm going to navigate advocating for Essa's health in daycare and with his kids' friends at birthday parties without wanting to be a food cop. You can feel like the little kid in the emperor has no clothes fable when you see kids being given copious amounts of sugar that will deregulate their little bodies as it did to ours. But they bombard kids with advertisements because of the sense of home or comfort we will associate with these foods. And kids become adults like us with buying power that will return to these foods and hopefully then give them to their kids, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, etc. So copious amounts of advertising are coming at us. And then the sugar industry gets as much as $4 billion of subsidies every year, which makes it cheaper for consumers while profitable and allowing for a higher value of sales for companies. Lettuce isn't naturally more expensive than peanut M&Ms. Many of us rely on processed carbs also because they are fast, and with many of us working so much, they become a solution to a resource crunch of both time and money. So when we measure value in terms of dollars only, healthy food is much more of an immediate investment. And that is really tough for a lot of people, right? We have to have compassion for how expensive being healthy food is these days. But that's not natural. It's because of our farm bill, which is really a food bill. And as a result of sugar being so cheap to buy for food companies and then easy to sell us more of, 50% of our farming land becomes dedicated to growing corn and soy to feed to animals and refine into sugar. This farmland isn't growing real food full of nutrition. And that's a whole other podcast also about monoculture farming and the effects of it on the environment. But needless to say, it's really, really dangerous. And then we are living in very stressful, uncertain times. And so sugar becomes a solution, not the problem when we are feeling stressed. I'll get more into breaking that down in the second half of this episode. But in summary, we are advertised processed carbs constantly from birth. They become an emotional sense of refuge. They are then cheaper, and so they become easily accessible, and consuming processed carbs in copious amounts becomes normalized. Throughout the season, I've been talking a lot about how processed foods, mainly processed carbs, affect us, particularly around blood sugar and how blood sugar presents emotionally. If you want to understand more of the physiology, please listen to the previous episodes of this season. Also, I did an entire episode that became one of the most downloaded and discussed, which is episode 34, which originally aired on August 1st, 2016, called Anatomy of a Sugar Craving. Check that out too if you want to delve deeper into what's physically happening. And I will link to that podcast in the show notes. Remember, we always have show notes for whatever I mention here, and including transcripts are available. Oh, and that's at alishapiro.com/podcast. So what I want to do today from a physiological and food standpoint is look at the top 5 food tips to naturally boost your sweet tooth. Also, it's important to recognize that you must know as a baseline what foods work best for your body, as discussed in episode 2 of this season. But knowing where you fall on the continuum between vegetarian, Mediterranean, or paleo is going to be foundational to rehabbing from sugar. And in episode 6, the one before this, I gave you a rule of thumb of how to balance yourself if you aren't rock solid on what foods work for you. So if you're still at that part of your journey, definitely go back and listen to episode 2 and episode 6, because these tips will build upon that, but are also part of the same things that you'll have to do. So these 5 tips are building upon being in the ballpark of what macronutrient ratios of foods work best for you. And macronutrients are your fats, carbs, and proteins. And that will eliminate at least half of your cravings once you start eating the right foods for your body. So the first thing to do is become aware of how much sugar you're eating, including in your salty foods, right? Because salty carbs are just sugar breaking down in the body. Same process, except you got a little salt too. So I want you to observe how much sugar is in what you're eating. I can give you these big macro numbers like I did above about advertising their subsidies, and they will come to life when you look at your individual life. So again, remember the visual. 4 teaspoons of sugar is about 1 sugar packet. Whenever I do classes on sugar, I always start with this, including things like the naked green smoothie, right? Which you think, oh, it's vegetables and fruit. The fiber is removed though, so it's going to really affect your blood sugar. Guess how much sugar is in a naked green smoothie? 58 grams of sugar, right? If we divide that by 4 packets, it's about 15 packets of sugar with no fiber. And yes, it's different when they're from fruits and vegetables, but still that amount is just not natural to eat in a sitting. That's more than a pumpkin spice latte or 15 grams. That's just crazy. Becoming aware is always our first step to change. And starting to understand that the more sugar you eat, the hungrier you will be is also critical. When I was doing this episode, I looked at our own condiments while writing, and I saw that we have this Annie's organic honey mustard in it. No, I actually don't know how that got into our house. We had a lot of family here helping us, but I looked at the ingredients, and first of all, it had no honey, even though it was called honey mustard. It used cane sugar. And for 1 teaspoon of honey mustard, right? And when you do like a squirt of it, right, you're probably getting out like at least a tablespoon. So this is just 1 teaspoon. had 2 grams of sugar, right? That's half a packet of sugar in 1 teaspoon of honey mustard. I will be using the Dijon mustard from now on. I'm not sure, how that even got in our house, but it's just fascinating to see. And either way, it was a huge learning moment for me. That honey mustard doesn't even have honey in it. Of course, that was one brand. Maybe some do, but whew. And if you're looking at something like pretzels or bread, look at the total carbohydrates and look at how much fiber goes along with that. You ideally want at least 3 to 4 grams of fiber per serving, but you will start to see how many empty carbohydrates are in our food when you see something like 35 grams of carbohydrates per serving with 0 fiber. For example, many pastas will have 43 grams of carb with 1 gram of fiber. Whereas, just to give you an understanding of what whole foods looks like, an apple, which is a whole food, has 25 grams of carbs, but 5 grams of fiber, right? So that fiber really slows the effect of sugar coming into our system. Because we've been told in diet culture that a calorie is a calorie. So you think, well, if I have X amount of calories, I'll feel full. But with sugar, you will see how the more you eat, the more you want. I often use a roller coaster for a blood sugar analogy. And what sugar does is it adds not only more peaks and valleys, which leads to more cravings and crashing, but more tracks to the ride. And the more tracks, the more hungry you get. So become aware. Number 2, replace high sugar products with more real food equivalent. This will naturally reduce your sugar content and up your fat and fiber, which will decrease your sweet cravings and desire for the sweet flavor. So you can replace ketchup with salsa, replace honey mustard with mustard, or make your own mustard with actual honey. If you are eating breads, aim for 4 grams of fiber per serving or no sugar added. I love, for people who could tolerate gluten, the sprouted Ezekiel bread. Probably the best stuff out there. Replace frozen yogurt with ice cream. Replace juices, like even fruit juice, vegetable juices, and convert to smoothies. You'll get the fiber, which is really important. And oftentimes with smoothies, you can add your own fats, like nut butter or avocados or coconut oil, which will even out your blood sugar effect. Replace cereals with steel-cut oats. Or if you're someone who doesn't do well with grains, really make sure that granola you're eating doesn't have a ton of sugar added. Replace yogurt with syrupy fruit to plain unsweetened yogurt with fruit in it. Often, just so you know, speaking of profit margins, often the fruit that's in yogurt is the stuff that was going bad. And then they put it in sugar and preservatives to prevent it. And they charge a really big margin for syrupy fruit. So you can do the same thing with your unsweetened yogurt and add your own fresh fruit. Replace dressings with lower sugar dressings or simple olive oil, vinegar, or lemon and natural sea salt. Replace milk chocolate with dark chocolate with a high cacao content and lower grams of sugar with natural sources. And replace skim milk with full fat dairy. Same with your yogurt. Full fat dairy is so much better. So that brings me to number 3, more healthy fats. I always have to include this because as much as people know this, many people still aren't getting enough fat. I was talking with a family member who asked for some advice because her blood work came back with high cholesterol. And I told her to, log your food for a couple days and I'll see what pointers I can offer if you'd like them. And she said yes. And I told her the first thing she was doing was eating egg whites. And I said, you got to add the yolk back in. That fat and protein is why you're crashing at 10 a.m. And she said, oh, but I have high cholesterol. And I was like, oh, many people still think cholesterol is something to be feared. Right. If you have super high cholesterol, we're talking high 200s, like, yes. I mean, like 280, 260, 270, 280. Yes. You got to really pay attention to that. But the root cause of high cholesterol is actually sugar or dehydration. Dr. Oz had this great analogy maybe like 10 years ago where he talked about sugar coalesces in your body to create shard-like glass, and it cuts at your vein, not your veins, but your internal state. And then what happens is cholesterol goes in to patch that up so that it's not weak. And often too with dehydration, if you aren't getting enough water, cholesterol will fill in to preserve the integrity of the cell wall. And so again, really high cholesterol is often the solution to a different problem. It's not the problem itself. You need cholesterol for your brain, etc. I found it really fascinating when I was in grad school. We went to Sweden to study their systems and we studied their healthcare system because it's amazing. And the doctors there don't even test for high cholesterol because they found that it doesn't actually improve outcomes, right? And there's a whole history of why we even test high cholesterol because of big pharma. They lobbied to have the definition of high cholesterol lowered. And also they thought if they can target one thing in the body, then you can make a pill for it. And there's plenty of side effects with statins, but that's not the point. My point is that people are still afraid of healthy fats. I also had a client who got her master's degree in the UK, and she told me when she was there, she had like excellent blood work, except she had high cholesterol. And she brought it up to her doctor there, and he was like, "That's an American marketing technique. Go out and enjoy your life." And I was like, "Yes, helps so much when you can see that other countries don't even really pay attention to it." And again, this is an example of the socialized mind that we work on in Truths with Food. If we are socialized to believe something like cholesterol is a problem and not the solution to issues like too much sugar in our diet, we can really go astray because healthy fats help prevent sugar cravings. So here are some suggestions to incorporate more healthy fats. Your eggs with your yolks, and the closer you can get to pasture raised eggs, the richer the omega-3s will be. Eating skin on chicken, the amino acids actually help with anxiety. I learned this from Allie Miller, who's a holistic nutritionist. My sister loves her work and has been telling me a lot about things. And it got me to think about whole foods, right? Like when you look at native cultures, they use every part of the animal. And here in Western world, we just cut up the pieces, right? And we throw things out and things are good and bad. But you need the skin on the chicken to help you with some important amino acids. You can put slivered almonds on your steel cut oats. Do more than a few forks dips of dressing and make sure the dressing is actually healthy oils. You can use butter or ghee on your sweet potato. I've been doing that pretty much all winter. It's amazing. I put ghee or butter, whatever we have, with some sea salt. And if I'm not tired, I'll sprinkle cinnamon as well. And it's such an amazing side to whatever I'm eating. Dark almond bark, right? That has almonds in it. You can eat your sweets after a meal with good fats. And then maybe a client favorite easy recipe that I gave out in the past was dates stuffed with peanut butter. But if you don't like peanut butter, you can do almond butter. But that's a great way to get a little bit sweet and salty fat. Okay, so number 3 was more healthy fats. Number 4, more bitter flavor. Our taste buds change, okay? So the more processed sugar we eat, the more we crave its flavor. And we can reverse this. Again, and if you get well-rounded, which if you listen to the podcast and you don't get well-rounded, I think you should sign up for it at my website, AllieShavera.com. It's my bi-weekly newsletter, so it comes out every 2 weeks, and it synthesizes the most current research, and I put it into context of what I know. But in one edition, I cited the research that showed how our taste buds can change in the reverse direction. So yes, the more sugar we eat, we crave, but they can also be reversed in the opposite direction. And the study specifically focused on bitter foods. And in Chinese medicine, the bitter flavor helps to prevent sweet cravings. And in Western diets, we tend to seesaw between salty and sweet. And if you don't believe me, then tell me why Coca-Cola is aware of this and adds salt to Coke. So we want more sweets. Yes, there is salt in Coca-Cola so that we will drink more and more. So adding in the bitter flavor helps to reduce sweet flavor cravings. So you may want to try to eat more of those. And the bitter flavor comes in dark leafy greens like your kale, your collards, your Brussels sprouts, your cabbage, coffee without the sugar, right? Green tea is a bitter flavor, unsweetened cocoa, and chai tea is a great way to get some more bitter in. Decaf after lunch can help if you're feeling like a little bit of sweets. All right. Number 5, more real in-season fruit and veggies. We need healthy carbohydrates. Many people eliminate them and then binge to balance out in a way. In-season is so important because of heightened flavor and smell. What food companies are tinkering with more than anything is smell, which influences flavor and our total experience. It interacts with our emotions, our memories. I mean, it's wild. This is even different than just taste. So again, if you get my well-rounded newsletter, you may have clicked on the article that I included where I explained all of this. The takeaway is that more fresh local foods you eat, the more you will crave real flavors, not the manufactured ones. You'll notice these tips are mostly about what to add more into your diet. You can decrease sugar cravings by crowding them out with mostly real food, which naturally contains more fat and more flavor variety. Pretty neat, right? I'm all about less rules and boiling things down to their essence. The more you remove what isn't working, the less there is to do. So understand what you are up against and then devote yourself to a healthy rebellion. The more we get back to food in its natural state, including how it's grown, right? Talking about egg yolks with free range chickens that are outside eating grass, the less correction or rules we will need. This also includes getting our emotional state back to a more natural, heart open state rather than chronically defensive. When we are in our story, sugar is often the solution, not the problem. So let me explain. As I said above, food companies spend billions, that's a B, B, billions of dollars for us to connect sugar equals refuge, to comfort, to home. It's subliminal, yet over the years, it solidifies as sugar really does become part of our memories, right? Let's make it safe and then we can insert ourselves there. And then it does become part of our really fun memories. I've worked with so many clients over the years who can remember their soda habit started when their mom and them would stop at 7-Eleven and get big Slurpees. Or I remember after swimming lessons, we would always stop at Dunkin' Donuts on the way home. So it was like after a hard workout, reward. Or often going out to ice cream was one of the few happy memories that clients would have with their families. Or they were rewarded with food. And so food was a recognition of their efforts. And now they come home at night wanting recognition for their efforts, right? That's part of where that rewarding ourselves with food starts. And again, using sugar to celebrate or connect us with traditions isn't a bad thing or something we have to eliminate completely. It's when turning to sugar actually makes our bodies and psyches feel more unsafe that is the problem. When we turn to sugar to ground us, we lose the ability to develop the inner safety and resilience we need to ground us long term, not just while we are eating. And turning to sugar makes it even harder when you consider the research I shared in the last episode of how hyperglycemia, which is when large amounts of glucose are in the body, which is how the body breaks down processed carbs, it increases feelings of anxiety and sadness. Sugar also leads to inflammation, which leads to depression. So this isn't about all or nothing. It's about chronic use of sugar as a 1-2 punch on our emotional resilience and sense of power. When it comes to our stories, I found there are 4 feelings that trigger our stories and make us turn to processed carbs. I use the acronym TAIL to help my clients and why am I eating this now remember what's at the tail end of this craving. T stands for tired, A stands for anxious, which is usually uncertain, I stands for inadequacy. Terms like imposter syndrome tend to be more common, and L stands for lonely. So when I say sugar is the solution, we use it when we are feeling any of these 4 emotions, and we use them for different reasons. Today, I'm going to give you a few reasons and ideas to experiment with. And understand being able to identify what feeling is an important part of this, because so many people think sugar is only about the taste and the physiological effects. It is not. Even if you're waking up in the morning and thinking that you go for something sweet because you love the taste. Nope, there's something that is happening probably chronically that you can't even yet recognize why you're going there right away. So we need to get out of this all or nothing media messaging too. There's a lot of nuance of why we turn to processed carbs. It's just not about the taste. So the first feeling is tired. And tired, this is probably the most stealth one. We have all normalized a certain level of fatigue. I'm still working on this one. Even working on this episode, the last 2 months have been so intense as I've gone back to work with a newborn. I laugh with my mom, who is here watching Essa today, that I needed a nap, yet had to finish the last episode, this one. And what I really wanted was to eat the gluten-free coffee cake she brought last week that was still in the fridge, so I'd have energy to power through. Well, I had a little piece, and then I laid down. And I put butter on it, and here I am, totally fine, not craving anything more. But I've also healed my own blood sugar issues, whereas something like that tiny sliver of gluten-free coffee cake would have sent me into a spiral of crashing and cravings 10 years ago. Anyway, this isn't my food diary. But when I have clients really tune in when they aren't having a physical craving, they're astonished at how often they want sugar when they are tired because they feel like, right, they've got deadlines. I do have a deadline, even though I created my own too short deadline. I had no idea how intense having a newborn and going back to work would be. I know. Some things I'm so self-aware and other things I'm a work in progress, just like everyone else. But our stories have us white knuckle a lot of things in our life. Exercise, pushing through work stuff, or prevent us from finding natural energy solutions like creativity. Instead, we zone out on the couch with takeout and Netflix, which isn't really restorative all the time. So next time you ask yourself, what's at the tail end of this sugar craving and tired is the answer, here are some ideas. So some ideas when you start to feel your energy wane. get outdoors. Natural light is so important for our energy. And if you listen to my light episode with Brandon Mentor, an old buddy from Philadelphia, we talked about how we get more of our energy needs from the sun than food. Blue blocking glasses are also important. And again, if you haven't listened to that episode in season 6, episode 5, and I'll link to it in the show notes. It's an awesome, awesome episode. Okay, when your energy wanes, nap or get more sleep. This may seem obvious, but the irony is processed carbs can make sleep difficult. A lot of times people awaken in the middle of the night with mind racing because they're dropping blood sugar. Again, dropping blood sugar triggers panic. But getting more sleep is essential. And you can also stop caffeine before 12, which will also decrease physical carb cravings to help you get better sleep. The third idea is to move your body. Now, this might seem counterintuitive, but many of us are tired from being stagnant. And you might be too tired to exercise, but you know the old saying, an object in motion stays in motion. Light movement. I'm talking walking or a yoga flow or whatever, doing steps in your house or at work will remove the stagnation and get us more energized. And here's a pro tip. The sooner you check in with yourself, the sooner you will feel slightly tired rather than exhausted. Many of us can only feel these feelings when they are acute, and often there is no turning back with food at that point. Awareness is half the challenge here. Our next feeling is anxious, which is often code for uncertainty. And we are all in uncertain times. It seems like every information revolution does this. The printing press, the internet now. If we don't know how to handle uncertainty, we will turn to the refuge of processed carbs. And what's tricky about battling food and sugar is often a sense of home is chaos. I have a client who came to me because of her own sugar habit. And then what she realized was that when her story was active, she felt like she was spinning. And she realized not having that spinning made her uncomfortable. And so she actually used sugar to keep the spinning going. In other words, for people who have had chaotic childhoods or otherwise normalized chaos, any hint of calm can make people uncertain. So sugar will make us feel chaotic, and that's what we're comfortable. Uncertainty tips are so hard because this is a more long-term feeling we need to learn to master. But here's a couple of tips when you're feeling anxious and want to ground yourself without sugar. The first thing you remember is nothing is make or break, as a mental reminder. When we are uncertain, we often fall back into black and white thinking. This outcome will lead to success or failure, adoration or rejection. When we make a choice, it's always somewhere in the middle. I had a client recently who has to make some big decisions about the company she built and what to do next. This felt like a really big uncertain change of one choice we were talking about, and it was. Yet she found it helped some things and didn't make such a difference either way towards success or failure. Most of life is like this. Yet we tend to build up our next choice, which exaggerates the degree of uncertainty we are feeling, right? This has to be perfect because X, when really there's a lot more room for error. Breathwork is also a great way to clear this build up and right size reality. We had Ashley Nissan, and I'll highly recommend her book. I did a lot of her practices during my pregnancy when I got news that my mind wanted to spin into disaster. And it did. Like I was measuring big, and even though it was probably nothing, my past, it's probably nothing cancer trauma made me focus on the worst case scenario. I reminded myself that whatever the news, we could handle it, and then I did breath work. I often cried and felt more grounded and a felt sense that regardless of the news, we as parents were going to have to expand our capacity for uncertainty. So this unfolding was one experience of a million where we have to practice staying calm and get the information we needed. You also realize when there's a million choices to make, like with growing a healthy human, not one choice can matter that much. And that helps ground us. Other thing is share with others who will most likely listen and not offer advice. And ask for this. Often we can ground back into our bodies by taking our energy from up in our head and talking it out to move it down into our bodies, into what is real. We might even cry or laugh. Getting into our bodies gets us rooted in what is real right now. And many times we overeat so that we can feel back in our bodies. The third thing, move your body. This is going to be a theme. There is a real physical discomfort to uncertainty, especially if you haven't healed past trauma. As I just said with talking it out with someone who will listen, we need to ground into what is real and present. We have a tendency to retreat into food when we need to practice staying in our bodies because there is so much insight and information there. And what we embrace dissolves. I used to binge on sugar before and after my yearly oncology scans. But what I know now, I felt insane because I knew cancer cells feasted on sugar. But so why was I doing it? I didn't have a logical explanation. But now I understand the uncertainty of what they might find was what was controlling me. I have healed my story so much that when these scans come around today, I feel the uncertainty much less and make sure to really do yoga and move a lot in nature when it's time for those tests. Keeps me grounded in today. And then actually at the end of 2018, they found a lump in my breast and a nodule on my thyroid, which are the two cancers that I am monitored for. And I was able to stay so grounded for the 6 weeks it took between MRI, getting my old records from Philadelphia, and it all turned out okay. And I was so proud of myself I didn't turn to food. I kept myself healthy because I knew that's what it took in those moments to be emotionally resilient. So moving in our body, we've talked a lot this season about changing the meaning of exercise. And that's one thing that has been really helpful for me with uncertainty, is using movement as a way to get out that fear. All right. The next feeling is inadequacy. This is when we feel too much or not enough in some ways. One of the biggest mindset shifts I love is from Dr. Carol Dweck's growth mindset work, which she says, I haven't figured this out yet. And I love this because it reminds us we're capable, right? And also that nothing is permanent, including that we feel inadequate. When we're in our stories, to get a little technical, we feel like inadequacy is a fixed characteristic of us, not the conditions. So when we say, I haven't figured this out yet, we can realize, oh, I may have inadequate information or I may not have the skill set yet, but I can learn this. This isn't something that I'm inherently wrong or broken. The second thing when we're dealing with inadequacy is to ask clarifying questions. We more times than not feel inadequate because of how we're imagining things to be. Often clients are in dysfunctional companies or leadership and unknowingly take on the lack of organization, thinking they should just know. Asking questions and saying, I'm trying to get clear here. Why is this? Or what are your expectations here? Helps the next step in front of them go from supersized to right size. And number 3 for this one, I recommend the same tips as above for uncertainty in terms of nothing is make or break. We're trying to go from supersizing the next step to right sizing it and understanding that it's not black and white, success or failure, rejection or instant, acceptance. All right. And the last emotion is lonely. Feeling alone and isolated is pretty awful. And I find this drives sugar cravings so much, but people don't often even realize how isolated they are. During the first 6 weeks of Essa's life, I was so taken aback by how hard it was. And even though people tell you it's hard, I felt like I was somehow not cut out for this. I follow a lot of natural motherhood social media accounts, and often what is shared are these gorgeous photos of parents sharing how it was love at first sight, and everyone's dressed and their hair's done. And I told a friend that was checking in on me that I, of course, love Essa, but also felt somewhat ambivalent and felt really bad for feeling this way. She told me that after she had her son, she told her husband that she'd be more upset if he died than their son at the 6-week mark. And she said it was a lot of hormones changing. And right, it's part of that. She's been in a relationship with her husband for over a decade and she's known her son for 6 weeks. Relationships take time to build, right? But I felt lonely because I just felt like, oh, even though people tell you this, I'm somehow different. I also shared with one of my midwives, Kara, who sometimes listens to the show. Hi, Kara. At my 6-month checkup, how I was feeling. And she told me the best thing. And she told me that in nature, elephants who have just given birth try to stomp their young, and the other female elephants protect the new baby. They do a circle around the baby elephant. I laughed so hard because obviously I had no thought. I mean, thankfully I didn't have postpartum depression. So I had no thoughts of wanting to stomp my newborn son. However, I just, I had this one idea of nature, a black and white idea of nature versus the whole range of nature. And so many of my friends who were moms checked in, and particularly sharing the tornado we felt we were living with a few new moms who were 3 to 4 months ahead of me got me through, right? So feeling alone isn't about the number of people around us. It's whether your social needs are met. My friends were amazing at the recommendations I needed for what came up with our challenges, and also for listening, checking in, right? And that helped me not feel lonely. So that we don't feel lonely, first you have to learn your social needs. Often it's a simple yet scary fact that we need to share what we are struggling with in some capacity. We all need to be witnessed. Many clients never open up with their friends about their food issues because they're so private and shameful about it. But once they do, they find some of the relationships really deepen. The next thing we need is solitude. Research shows more solitude is important when we feel alone. Yes, we have to learn to be with ourselves so we can enjoy our own company and understand what our social needs are. Many times we don't even know. But if we give ourselves space and time, our intuition will come through. Journaling on this can be useful and a way to carve out that solitude. I am an extrovert, and through the years, as I've healed my story, I am so much more of an introvert than I ever knew. I need alone time because I really like being with myself now. It's also not that I didn't like being with myself before, it was just so uncomfortable. And then the last tip for loneliness is ask for what you need. And I want to share some client examples of how they no longer felt alone. So one client who was a new mom herself, got to understand this on such a deeper level now. She would come home from new mom meetups and eat. We were able to identify she was competing with the other moms on who already lost their baby weight. And since her weight wasn't where she wanted to be, she assumed she couldn't really identify with anyone there, as she found, quote, proof in how different they were based on who was a working mom, a stay-at-home mom, and other surface level labels. We had her experiment on connecting with one or two moms on something other than their weight and discovered both moms were as overwhelmed as she was, and they swapped sleeping and nursing tips. She no longer felt the desire to eat after these meetings and was thrilled to not have to put energy into other emotional eating tips. She was trying to make this like snacking as pleasurable as possible and to call a friend, right? We got to the root of what the real issue was and it cleared up. Another client had a lunchtime struggle. She realized her afternoon cravings disappeared and nighttime eating decreased when she made lunch her biggest meal of the day, right? Talk about hashtag blood sugar balance. But she wasn't consistent with this habit. In our work, she discovered she felt really awkward eating more than she was with coworkers and so avoided doing it. We had her experiment with actually sharing why she was doing this with a few coworkers she felt closer with. And it started this amazing discussion about European versus American eating habits and a few other coworkers wanting to try it. And one actually following through, and now it's a source of connection between them. Another client was a very overwhelmed entrepreneur. She had her own clients who she was working with. Her one client started asking about a couple more things to be done on the project. My client was starting to eat and drink at night to unwind from this client. We were able to identify her needs as wanting to do the extra work and that she needed to extend the contract with more time and ask for more money and not and try to squeeze the work in for free. This would also be more beneficial to the client who could get a better result with more time being spent on the task. And so she could remain center focused and creative with the client. She laid out the business case for extending the deadline and the increased cost. And the client came back and said, this makes so much sense. And so my client was able to enjoy the work process, provide a great client experience. She made more money and her eating and drinking was prevented. So learning to work through these tail feelings will really help you not turn to sugar as you develop a sense of safe refuge within yourself. In other words, you have your own back. And you develop the resilience that you can handle, quote, real life, because real life comes at you every day. It's not enough to feel your feelings to end a sugar habit. You have to hear what the sugar craving is trying to tell you and address the issue. I also get asked if I think chiropractor, acupuncture, or hypnosis can help with sugar. If it can help you with any of these tail emotions, I say try it, experiment. I know acupuncture helps me a lot with my energy levels, which is the main reason I eat sugar these past few years, trying to be more productive. It really replenishes my energy, short term. But for me, acupuncture alone isn't enough. It might be for some people though, but I found with myself and clients, sugar is so much more emotional in my experience than physical. It's why clients are shocked at how once we transform their story, sweets and chips don't call to them. I had a client call yesterday and we were about 5 months into our work together and she started to go for the chips and then was like, ugh, I don't even want these. They're actually not that good. And she didn't have to white knuckle them. And she was just like, nah. And this had never happened to her before, but we had a little chat about none of us love processed carbs as much as we think we do. And so when we remove the reason you were turning to them, you realize they don't taste all that good and really aren't that satisfying. The less refuge we need externally, the less we turn to sugar. It can be hard to believe that until you do the emotional work. I know I wouldn't have believed it, but I am living it myself and I see it with my clients too. So I know it's possible no matter how long we've struggled with food. So that's why I think it's tricky with hypnosis or neuro-linguistic programming, known as NLP for short, which is popular in some coaching circles. In food, this would translate as follows. I'm giving a really broad overview, so I'm not an NLP expert. I studied it a little bit in grad school, but I'm giving you the basic gist of what it does. So if someone had a consistent craving for brownies, which they identified as beginning a downward spiral, NLP would guide you to change the feeling around a brownie. So if you thought, oh, brownie feels warm, it feels comforting, NLP would work to try to change the feeling to repulsion. So it can work for some people, I'm sure. But if you aren't turning to the brownie because you love brownies, but because you are exhausted from work travel and want a reward, or you're procrastinating on a proposal, it might not be addressing the root problem. So in summary, sugar is the solution when we are feeling tail emotions. When we are tired, it gives us energy to keep going. When we are feeling uncertain, it makes us feel grounded. When we are feeling inadequate, it helps us procrastinate on our next steps. And when we feel lonely, it becomes a friend. By identifying when we are feeling any of the tail emotions, we can work through them to get what we really need and develop a sense of refuge within ourselves and those who care about us. In conclusion, the more sugar we eat, the more we are hungry for it and for its flavor. Companies market heavily to us and get massive subsidies from our tax dollars here in the US to make it financially cheap while normalizing unhealthy amounts of sugar consumption. Getting back to real whole foods, especially adding in fat in the bitter flavor, can change your taste buds so you crave fresh flavor instead of the manufactured flavor in processed foods. We turn to sugar when we are feeling tired, anxious, inadequate, or lonely because the association of refuge that has been built since childhood. It's not enough to only feel these feelings. We have to hear what the sugar craving is actually asking for and address it to reclaim the power and resilience we forget we have when in our stories. All right, that is a wrap on season 10. If you have enjoyed this season, I would so appreciate you sharing it with a friend. That's how people find the show, or leaving a review, or both actually, on iTunes. It helps other people find the show. And again, I will be returning in the spring with an entire season on sugar, and I'll be doing some amazing interviews. I can't wait. I mean, I can wait. I need some time off from the podcast. But again, you have plenty of info here in season 10 to make major headway on sugar now. While it's great to listen, don't forget to pair listening with experimentation. Thank you for tuning in this season, and I look forward to chatting with you all more on social media, by email, and of course, the clients that I'm working with. All right, have a great one.